In the manicured gardens of a Virginia estate, a 74-year-old widow was about to be handed a bill for her own humiliation. What started as a simple act of attending her granddaughter's wedding took a shocking turn when she came face to face with a cream-colored envelope labeled outstanding balance. Beatrice Ellison wasn't your typical grandmother. For over 4 decades, she had served her community as a librarian and raised her family with quiet strength, known for her unwavering dignity and methodical intellect. When she received an itemized invoice for disruptions she never caused, Beatrice didn't cry or confront. She observed. She listened. She uncovered a memo that revealed she had been deliberately downgraded to lower-tier family. Her resolve hardened, not for vengeance but for truth. What began as a day to celebrate her granddaughter's future would become Beatrice's reckoning with the calculated cruelty of social maneuvering. The carefully arranged illusion of family unity would never be the same after the woman they tried to sideline decided to speak. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Beatrice Ellison had always believed in showing up. Through 62 years of marriage, 43 years as a librarian, and 74 years of quiet dignity, she had learned that half of life's battles were won simply by being present. So, despite the arthritic twinge in her left knee and the familiar ache of family tension, Bea arrived at Oakvale Estate precisely 40 minutes before her granddaughter's wedding ceremony. Her silver hair swept into a modest chignon, and her posture as straight as the spine of a well-bound book. The Virginia countryside sprawled in lush greens and golds beyond the estate's manicured lawns. White chairs and military rows faced an elaborate floral arch where Lauren would soon promise herself to Andrew Miller, heir to a hotel fortune that Bea's late husband Thomas would have found ostentatious. The thought of Thomas made her adjust. The pearl brooch he'd given her on their 30th anniversary, her talisman for difficult days. "Mrs. Ellison, you made it!" Christine Miller's voice arrived before she did. Practiced, melodic, and carrying just enough warmth to pass as sincere. The mother of the groom approached in a tailored champagne dress that likely cost more than Bea's monthly pension. "We were beginning to wonder." Bea offered a polite smile. "I wouldn't miss Lauren's day for the world." "Of course not." Christine's gaze drifted to Bea's simple blue dress. Something flickered behind her eyes. Assessment, perhaps disappointment. "Lauren will be so relieved you're here." "The bridal suite is that way, though they're quite busy with final preparations." Bea understood the subtle redirection. "I'll find my seat then." "Perfect." Christine gestured vaguely toward the rear section of chairs. "I believe you're in row 7, left side." 7 rows back, left side. The message wasn't lost on Bea, who had helped raise Lauren during the summers after Thomas died. She was being positioned as a peripheral figure, an obligation rather than honored family. But this was Lauren's day, not hers. Bea nodded and made her way to her assigned seat, pretending not to notice how the Miller family occupied the first 3 rows on the right, while her own son Daniel and his wife Monica weren't visible yet. The ceremony itself was lovely in its extravagance. Lauren emerged in a cascade of antique lace, her smile tremulous but genuine as she caught Bea's eye during her procession. Andrew stood tall and confident at the altar, his posture suggesting a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. Bea watched her only granddaughter speak her vows clearly, proudly. Whatever else was happening around them, Lauren's happiness seemed real, and that was enough. It was during the reception that the cracks began to show. The seating chart placed Bea at table 19, near the kitchen doors and far from the sweeping windows that showcased the estate's pond. The table card read, "Family Friends," though Bea recognized no one else seated there. 4 elderly couples who appeared to be distant Miller relatives, and a solitary widower who dozed between courses. "Enjoying yourself, Mrs. Ellison?" Monica's voice startled her. Lauren's mother stood behind Bee's chair, elegant in lavender silk, a glass of champagne dangling from manicured fingers. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "The wedding was beautiful," Bee replied carefully. Lauren looked radiant. "She didn't she?" Monica glanced toward the head table where Lauren and Andrew sat surrounded by his family. "The Millers have been so generous with everything. We're lucky to have made such a connection." Bee noted the absence of her son. "Is Daniel enjoying himself?" "Oh, you know Daniel. Networking. The Millers know half the law firms in the state." Monica's laugh was brittle. "He's probably securing clients as we speak." "I'd like to say hello when he has a moment." "Of course." Monica's attention was already drifting. "I should check on the cake timing. The coordinator seems a bit overwhelmed." As Monica walked away, Bee noticed how she was immediately absorbed into a circle of Miller relatives, her body language transforming, becoming more animated, more eager to please. Bee sipped her water and watched the room with the practiced observation of someone who had spent decades helping library patrons find exactly what they needed, sometimes before they knew they needed it. The reception flowed around her like water around a stone. Daniel made a brief appearance at her table, pecking her cheek and making vague promises about brunch the next day. The cake was cut, the first dance completed. Bee applauded politely, ignoring the persistent loneliness of being family, yet somehow not quite belonging. It was during the latter part of the evening, as guests began the slow migration between dance floor and bar, that Christine Miller approached Bee's table again. Her smile was fixed, her eyes calculating. "Beatrice, I wanted to catch you before things wind down." Christine's voice lowered confidentially as she slid into the empty chair beside Bee. "We've had such a lovely celebration, haven't we?" "Lauren seems very happy," Bee replied, guarded. "Yes, well, we spared no expense." Christine's perfectly manicured hand reached into a small clutch purse. "Which brings me to a somewhat awkward matter. The venue has been keeping track of certain adjustments made throughout the event." Christine withdrew a cream-colored envelope and placed it discreetly on the table between them. It was labeled in elegant script, "Outstanding balance, reception add-ons." "There were some special accommodations made, you see." Christine's voice maintained its pleasant tone, though her eyes had hardened. "Your tea service during setup, the table adjustment, the menu modifications. Small things that add up." Bee stared at the envelope. "I don't understand." "Just business, Beatrice. The Millers believe in accountability." Christine stood smoothly. "No need to handle it tonight. After you've had time to review, you can send a check to the address listed. We've included an itemized breakdown." With a polite nod, Christine drifted away, leaving Bee alone with the envelope. Around her, the celebration continued unabated. Laughter, music, the clink of glasses. With fingers that had suddenly gone cold, Bee opened the seal and removed a neatly printed invoice. "Special menu requests, $872. Seating adjustment fee, $550. Guest disruption accommodation, $1,200. Service staff overtime, $850. Total, due, $3,072. The figures blurred as Bee stared at them. She hadn't requested any special menu. She'd arrived exactly when instructed. The only disruption had been asking a staff member for hot tea before the ceremony because the air conditioning had aggravated her arthritis. A wave of humiliation washed over her, followed quickly by confusion. Was this normal? Did people bill wedding guests now? Or was this something uniquely directed at her? Bee slipped the invoice back into the envelope with hands that betrayed only the slightest tremor. Across the room, she caught Monica watching her, then quickly turning away. Pride kept Bee's spine straight as she tucked the envelope into her handbag. Dignity prevented her from making a scene at her granddaughter's wedding, but something else, something that felt like Thomas whispering in her ear, kept her from accepting this calculated slight without question. She would say nothing tonight. She would smile and congratulate and pretend that the envelope burning a hole in her purse didn't exist. But as Bea watched Christine rejoin a circle of laughing guests, something shifted in her chest, a quiet, smoldering resolve. Thomas had always said she was too forgiving, too willing to maintain peace at her own expense. "Your silence isn't weakness, Bea," he'd told her once. "But sometimes your silence allows others to write your story for you." Bea took a measured sip of water and set the glass down precisely on its coaster. Tonight belonged to Lauren. Tomorrow, however, belonged to her. The weight of the envelope in Bea's handbag seemed to grow heavier as the reception entered its final act. The master of ceremonies, a polished young man with 2 white teeth and a voice cultivated for public speaking, announced it was time for toasts. Bea straightened in her chair, her fingers absently tracing the clasp of her purse where Christine's invoice lay hidden. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Monica Ellison, mother of the bride." Polite applause rippled through the reception hall as Monica rose from her seat at the head table. She looked elegant, composed, a woman who had spent years perfecting the art of fitting in with those she considered her betters. Bea watched her daughter-in-law lift a champagne flute, her smile practiced and bright. "What a perfect day for our perfect Lauren," Monica began, her voice carrying the slight tremor of someone unaccustomed to public speaking but determined to excel. "Andrew, we couldn't have imagined a more wonderful man for our daughter. The Miller family has welcomed Lauren with such generosity and grace." Monica's gaze swept the room, carefully avoiding Bea's table. "I want to thank everyone who helped make this day possible. Christine, your vision for this celebration has been nothing short of extraordinary. The attention to detail, the impeccable taste, everything a mother could dream of for her daughter's wedding." Bea's hands folded tightly in her lap as Monica continued to list contributors: the wedding planner, the Miller's connections that secured the venue, Christine's personal florist. Not once did she mention Bea, who had helped raise Lauren during summer breaks, who had taught her to read before kindergarten, who had preserved all of Thomas's letters for Lauren to someday inherit. And of course, my husband Daniel, who has worked tirelessly to ensure today would be worthy of our Lauren. As applause followed, Bea caught snippets of conversation from a nearby table. "Barely contributed a thing, from what I heard. Christine mentioned the grandmother was quite demanding. Must be difficult when family doesn't step up financially." Bea's cheeks warmed, but her expression remained neutral. The same expression she had perfected when patrons returned books with coffee stains or dog-eared pages. Some things were beneath comment. She would not allow strangers to witness her humiliation. The toasts continued. Christine Miller rose next, commanding the room with practiced ease. "The Miller family has always believed that legacy matters," she began, her voice honeyed. "When Andrew brought Lauren home, I knew immediately she understood the value of tradition, of building something lasting." Christine raised her glass. "To the Miller family legacy, and to Lauren, who will now help carry it forward." The room raised their glasses. "To the Miller family legacy." Bea lifted her water glass politely, noting how Christine's toast had neatly absorbed Lauren into the Miller identity while erasing the Ellison name entirely. Across the room, Daniel clinked glasses with Christine, laughing at something she whispered. He hadn't looked in Bea's direction once during the toasts. As servers circulated with fresh champagne, Lauren caught Bea's eye from the head table. Her granddaughter's smile faltered slightly. A flash of something, apology? Awareness? Crossing her features before Andrew leaned in to claim her attention. In that brief moment, Bea saw the little girl who had once hidden in her library, nook during thunderstorms, seeking the safety of books and her grandmother's quiet presence. "Ma'am?" A young waitress with kind eyes and a name tag reading Clara paused beside her. "Can I get you anything?" "No, thank you, dear," Bea replied. Clara hesitated, then leaned slightly closer under the pretense of collecting an empty glass. "I'm sorry about your table placement. It wasn't right." Bea looked up, surprised by the direct acknowledgement. "The staff notice things," Clara added quietly before straightening. At normal volume, she continued, "I'll bring some fresh water." As Clara moved away, Bea found herself reconsidering the envelope. Her fingers reached for her handbag, and she excused herself to the ladies' room, where the sounds of celebration were muted behind heavy doors. In a private stall, Bea withdrew the invoice again. Looking more closely, she noticed oddities beyond the exorbitant amounts. The line item labeled Seating Adjustment Fee included a notation, Table 19 reconfiguration per Miller family request. The guest disruption accommodation cited pre-ceremony staff redirection with no further explanation. Each entry was initialed CM Christine Miller. This was no administrative error. This was deliberate. When Bea returned to the reception, the dancing had begun. Lauren whirled in Andrew's arms, her face flushed with happiness. Monica stood with a group of Miller relatives, nodding eagerly at something Christine was saying. Daniel worked the room, like the lawyer he was, clapping shoulders and shaking hands. None of them appeared to notice Bea's absence or return. "Champagne, ma'am?" Another server, a young woman with Marnie on her name tag, offered a tray. "Just water, please," Marnie nodded, setting down a fresh glass. "If you don't mind me saying, the bride looks just like you around the eyes." Bea smiled genuinely, for the first time that evening. "Thank you for noticing." "My grandma raised me too," Marnie said quietly, her eyes understanding. Sometimes people forget who really shows up. Something about the young woman's direct kindness made the knot in Bea's chest loosen slightly. As Marnie moved to the next table, Bea glanced toward Lauren again, seeing Thomas in the determined set of her jaw as she navigated the crowd, graciously accepting congratulations. Thomas would have hated this, the pretension, the calculated slights. He had built his reputation as an attorney by representing clients regardless of their social standing. "Money can't buy character, Bea," he used to say. And some people spend a fortune trying. As the evening progressed, Bea observed the interactions around her with increasing clarity. The Miller family operated as a unit, absorbing Lauren while creating subtle barriers. Monica aligned herself with Christine at every opportunity, her eagerness to belong palpable. Daniel moved between groups but never toward Bea. By the time the cake was served, a towering creation of white fondant and sugar flowers, Bea had made a decision. She would not confront Christine or create a scene that might tarnish Lauren's memories of her wedding day. But neither would she accept this calculated humiliation without understanding its source. The envelope no longer felt like a burden of shame. Instead, it had become a mystery to solve, a thread to pull. Bea had spent her career helping people find answers in the quiet stacks of her library. She would approach this puzzle with the same methodical attention. Tomorrow, she would begin asking questions, quietly, carefully, beginning with the staff who seemed to see what the guests did not. Thomas had always said she had a librarian's best quality, patient persistence in the search for truth. It was time to put that quality to use. The weight of the envelope in Bea's handbag seemed to grow heavier as the reception entered its final act. The master of ceremonies, a polished young man with 2 white teeth and a voice cultivated for public speaking, announced it was time for toasts. Bea straightened in her chair, her fingers absently tracing the clasp of her purse where Christine's invoice lay hidden. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Monica Ellison, mother of the bride." Polite applause rippled through the reception hall as Monica rose from her seat at the head table. She looked elegant, composed, a woman who had spent years perfecting the art of fitting in with those she considered her betters. Bea watched her daughter-in-law lift a champagne flute, her smile practiced and bright. "What a perfect day for—" "Our perfect Lauren," Monica began. her voice carrying the slight tremor of someone unaccustomed to public speaking, but determined to excel. "Andrew, we couldn't have imagined a more wonderful man for our daughter. The Miller family has welcomed Lauren with such generosity and grace." Monica's gaze swept the room, carefully avoiding Bee's table. "I want to thank everyone who helped make this day possible. Christine, your vision for this celebration has been nothing short of extraordinary. The attention to detail, the impeccable taste, everything a mother could dream of for her daughter's wedding." Bee's hands folded tightly in her lap as Monica continued to list contributors: the wedding planner, the Miller's connections that secured the venue, Christine's personal florist. Not once did she mention Bee, who had helped raise Lauren during summer breaks, who had taught her to read before kindergarten, who had preserved all of Thomas's letters for Lauren to someday inherit. And of course, my husband Daniel, who has worked tirelessly to ensure today would be worthy of our Lauren. As applause followed, Bee caught snippets of conversation from a nearby table. "Barely contributed a thing from what I heard. Christine mentioned the grandmother was quite demanding. Must be difficult when family doesn't step up financially." Bee's cheeks warmed, but her expression remained neutral. The same expression she had perfected when patrons returned books with coffee stains or dog-eared pages. Some things were beneath comment. She would not allow strangers to witness her humiliation. The toasts continued. Christine Miller rose next, commanding the room with practiced ease. "The Miller family has always believed that legacy matters," she began, her voice honeyed. "When Andrew brought Lauren home, I knew immediately she understood the value of tradition, of building something lasting." Christine raised her glass. "To the Miller family legacy, and to Lauren, who will now help carry it forward." The room raised their glasses. "To the Miller family legacy." Bee lifted her water glass politely, noting how Christine's toast had neatly absorbed Lauren into the Miller identity while erasing the Ellison name entirely. Across the room, Daniel clinked glasses with Christine, laughing at something she whispered. He hadn't looked in Bee's direction once during the toasts. As servers circulated with fresh champagne, Lauren caught Bee's eye from the head table. Her granddaughter's smile faltered slightly, a flash of something, apology, awareness, crossing her features before Andrew leaned in to claim her attention. In that brief moment, Bee saw the little girl who had once hidden in her library, nook during thunderstorms, seeking the safety of books and her grandmother's quiet presence. "Ma'am?" A young waitress with kind eyes and a name tag reading Clara paused beside her. "Can I get you anything?" "No, thank you, dear," Bee replied. Clara hesitated, then leaned slightly closer under the pretense of collecting an empty glass. "I'm sorry about your table placement. It wasn't right." Bee looked up, surprised by the direct acknowledgement. "The staff notice things," Clara added quietly before straightening. At normal volume, she continued, "I'll bring some fresh water." As Clara moved away, Bee found herself reconsidering the envelope. Her fingers reached for her handbag, and she excused herself to the ladies' room, where the sounds of celebration were muted behind heavy doors. In a private stall, Bee withdrew the invoice again. Looking more closely, she noticed oddities beyond the exorbitant amounts. The line item labeled Seating Adjustment Fee included a notation, Table 19 Reconfiguration, per Miller family request. The Guest Disruption Accommodation cited pre-ceremony staff redirection with no further explanation. Each entry was initialed CM, Christine Miller. This was no administrative error. This was deliberate. When Bee returned to the reception, the dancing had begun. Lauren whirled in Andrew's arms, her face flushed with happiness. Monica stood with a group of Miller relatives, nodding eagerly at something Christine was saying. Daniel worked the room like the lawyer he was, clapping shoulders and shaking hands. None of them appeared to notice Bee's absence or return. "Champagne, ma'am?" Another server, a young woman with Marnie on her name tag, offered a tray. "Just water, please." Marnie nodded, setting down a fresh glass. "If you don't mind me saying, the bride looks just like you around the eyes." Bea smiled genuinely for the first time that evening. "Thank you for noticing." "My grandma raised me too," Marnie said quietly, her eyes understanding. "Sometimes, people forget who really shows up." Something about the young woman's direct kindness made the knot in Bea's chest loosen slightly. As Marnie moved to the next table, Bea glanced toward Lauren again, seeing Thomas in the determined set of her jaw as she navigated the crowd, graciously accepting congratulations. Thomas would have hated this, the pretension, the calculated slights. He had built his reputation as an attorney by representing clients regardless of their social standing. "Money can't buy character, Bea," he used to say, "and some people spend a fortune trying." As the evening progressed, Bea observed the interactions around her with increasing clarity. The Miller family operated as a unit, absorbing Lauren while creating subtle barriers. Monica aligned herself with Christine at every opportunity, her eagerness to belong palpable. Daniel moved between groups but never toward Bea. By the time the cake was served, a towering creation of white fondant and sugar flowers, Bea had made a decision. She would not confront Christine or create a scene that might tarnish Lauren's memories of her wedding day. But neither would she accept this calculated humiliation without understanding its source. The envelope no longer felt like a burden of shame. Instead, it had become a mystery to solve, a thread to pull. Bea had spent her career helping people find answers in the quiet stacks of her library. She would approach this puzzle with the same methodical attention. Tomorrow, she would begin asking questions. Quietly, carefully, beginning with the staff who seemed to see what the guests did not. Thomas had always said she had a librarian's best quality, patient persistence in the search for truth. It was time to put that quality to use. With time to spare before her clandestine meeting with Clara and Marnie, Bea found herself drawn to the estate's gardens. The reception's noise faded with each step she took along the gravel path that wound through meticulously maintained flower beds. Solar-powered lanterns illuminated the walkway, casting gentle pools of light that guided her deeper into the quiet sanctuary. Here, away from watchful eyes, Bea could breathe. The weight of performance, the practiced smile, the careful posture, the measured responses eased slightly. She paused beside a rose arbor, its white blossoms luminous in the moonlight, and thought of Thomas. It had been 7 years since his passing. 7 years of adjusting to silence in rooms once filled with his baritone laugh. 7 years of learning to be Beatrice without being Mrs. Thomas Ellison. She touched the smooth wood of the arbor, weathered but solid, like the grief she had learned to carry. "You would have hated this, Thomas," she whispered to the night air. The memory came unbidden, Thomas in his study 3 months after Daniel had announced his engagement to Monica. "There's something calculating about her, Bea," he'd said, looking up from his legal briefs. "The way she watches Daniel when he's not looking, like she's appraising an investment." Bea had chided him gently. "She makes him happy, and she's trying so hard to fit in." "That's what worries me. She doesn't want to fit in with us. She wants us to fit in with wherever she's trying to go." Thomas had always been perceptive about people. It was what made him such an effective attorney. He could see the currents beneath calm waters, the motivations hiding behind pleasant smiles. But Bea had believed in giving Monica the benefit of doubt, in building bridges rather than erecting walls. The path curved around a reflecting pool, its surface mirroring the star-scattered sky. Bea lowered herself onto a stone bench, letting her mind drift further back. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Daniel had been different after Thomas died. The responsibility of taking over his father's practice had changed him, or perhaps had simply accelerated changes already underway. At the funeral, he had stood tall beside B, his grief evident but controlled. But in the months that followed, as he sorted through Thomas's cases and client relationships, something had shifted. "Dad never told me how complicated things were," he'd said one evening, his voice tight with frustration as he pored over files in Thomas's home office. "Some of these clients haven't paid in months, years even." "Your father believed everyone deserved representation," B had replied. "He often took payment in installments, sometimes in trade." Daniel had looked up, incredulous. "We can't run a modern practice like that. It's not sustainable." "It sustained us. It sustained you through law school." The memory of his expression, pity, tinged with embarrassment, still had the power to sting. "That was different, Mom. Times have changed. The firm needs to change too." Change it had. Within a year, Daniel had relocated the office from its modest downtown location to a sleek building in the financial district. The client list transformed. Fewer individuals, more corporations. Higher retainers, lower emotional investment. Monica had been delighted, organizing a reopening reception that Thomas's oldest clients couldn't have afforded to attend. A splash from the pond pulled B from her thoughts, a frog, perhaps, or a nightbird skimming the water's surface. She rose and continued along the path, her thoughts turning to Lauren. Sweet, perceptive Lauren, who had been just 7 when Thomas died. While Daniel and Monica navigated their social ascent, Lauren had spent summers with B, devouring books from the library's shelves and helping tend Thomas's vegetable garden. "Why does Mom get weird around you, Grandma?" 10-year-old Lauren had asked once, her hands dirty from planting carrots. "What do you mean, weird?" B had asked, careful to keep her tone light. "Like she's trying too hard. She laughs funny and talks about stuff she doesn't care about." "Even then, Lauren," had noticed. B had redirected gently, unwilling to come between mother and daughter. "Sometimes grown-ups get nervous around people they want to impress." "But why would Mom need to impress you? You're family." Family. Such a simple word for such a complicated reality. The memory shifted to Lauren's 12th birthday. Daniel. And Monica had planned an elaborate party at their country club, but a disagreement erupted the night before. Something about B bringing homemade cookies instead of ordering from the club's preferred bakery. "You never think anything I do is good enough," Monica had hissed in the kitchen, eyes bright with tears or anger. B could never tell which. "Nothing I plan is ever right for the precious Ellison traditions." The party had proceeded without B. But 3 days later, she'd received a call from a tearful Lauren, asking if she could come over. When B opened the door, Lauren stood there clutching her backpack, eyes red-rimmed. "Nobody ate the fancy cake," she'd said simply, "and I kept looking for you." They'd spent the afternoon making chocolate chip cookies from Thomas's favorite recipe. B had placed a candle in the center of a warm cookie and sang "Happy Birthday" with such enthusiasm that they'd both dissolved into giggles. It remained one of B's most treasured memories, not because it validated her against Monica, but because it reminded her why these small battles mattered. For Lauren. The garden path led B back toward the wedding venue, now glowing with golden light as the reception continued. Through the tall windows, she could see Christine Miller, perfectly poised, directing a photographer as she gathered various family groupings for portraits. The scene struck B with its familiar choreography, the careful curation of who stood, where, who was included, who was not. How many times had Monica orchestrated similar moments over the years? School events where B was seated in the back row rather than with the family. Holiday gatherings where her contributions were politely relegated to the kitchen, while Monica's friends occupied the place of honor. Graduations where she learned of her seat assignment upon arrival. What struck B now, watching Christine arrange people like chess pieces on a board, was how practiced the pattern had become. This wasn't a new wound. It was simply a deeper cut along a scar long established. Her exclusion had been perfected over years of small slights and careful omissions. Perhaps that was why the bill felt like such a calculated insult. It made explicit what had always been implied, that B was not truly family, but an obligation to be managed, a cost to be accounted for. Thomas had warned her once, in the early days of Daniel and Monica's marriage. "Stand your ground, B. If you don't, they'll keep moving the boundary until you can't see it anymore." She hadn't listened then, believing that peace was worth the occasional compromise of dignity, but watching Christine now, seeing the echo of every slight B had endured over the years, she wondered what Thomas would say about this latest boundary violation. The invoice wasn't just about money. It was about making visible what had been carefully kept beneath the surface. It was about power. Who had it? Who was denied it? Who wielded it while smiling? As B turned away from the window and checked her watch, 30 minutes until her meeting with Clara and Marnie, she felt a strange sense of calm descend. Her years of restraint hadn't been weakness, as Christine and Monica might believe. They had been practiced for this moment, training in the art of waiting for the right time to speak one's truth. 7 years without Thomas had taught her to stand alone. 43 years as a librarian had taught her to discover what lay beneath the surface of things. And 74 years of living had taught her that some battles, once chosen, must be fought with unwavering resolve. B straightened her shoulders and began walking toward the staff entrance, where truth awaited in the form of a memo. Whatever she discovered, there would determine her next move in this quiet war for dignity. Not for vengeance, Thomas would have cautioned against that, but for recognition. For Lauren. For the truth that had been hiding in plain sight for far too long. The staff entrance was exactly where Marnie had described, a nondescript door on the eastern side of the building, partially obscured by carefully placed shrubbery. In the moonlight, B could make out a small patio area with metal tables and chairs, currently empty save for a few discarded cigarette butts and an abandoned water bottle. She checked her watch. 10:57 p.m. Through the door's small window, she could see movement in the kitchen, staff clearing plates, wrapping leftover food, the choreographed efficiency of people accustomed to working in the background of other people's celebrations. B positioned herself in the shadow of a large potted plant, not hiding exactly, but not drawing attention either. A skill she'd refined over decades of existing in spaces where her presence was tolerated rather than welcomed. At precisely 11:00, the door opened. Clara emerged first, glancing around cautiously before motioning to B. Marnie followed, a folder clutched against her chest. "We don't have much time," Clara whispered. "The event coordinator is doing final rounds in 15 minutes. Marnie led them to the furthest table, partially concealed by the building's shadow. She opened the folder and withdrew a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the table to B. "Here it is. The memo." Under the glow of her cell phone flashlight, B examined the document. It was printed on Oakvale Estate letterhead, dated 3 days before the wedding. Internal staff memo. Ellison Miller wedding, special accommodations. On billing procedures. The text that followed made B's breath catch in her throat. As per discussion with client Christine Miller, mother of groom, the following accommodations have been implemented and should be billed separately from the main contract. 1. Table reassignment. B. Ellison moved from Table 3, family, to Table 19, peripheral guests. Client cited potential disruption if seated with primary family. Charge. Seating adjustment fee, $550 to. Service modification. B. Ellison's table to receive standard service timing rather than priority service. Client specified no special attention needed. Charge. Service staff overtime. $850. 3. Menu adjustments. B. Ellison to receive standard menu options. No wine pairing, standard dessert, while family tables receive premium selections. Charge. Special Menu Requests, 87244. Pre-event incident. Accommodate client complaint regarding B. Ellison's request for tea during setup, which client claims disrupted decoration process. Charge. Guest disruption accommodation, Wadding 205. Billing procedure. As directed, separate invoice to be prepared and delivered to B. Ellison during reception. All charges to be categorized under outstanding balance, reception add-ons. Note: client specified that B. Ellison falls under lower-tier family designation and should be billed directly rather than included in main contract. Client confirmed this arrangement has been communicated to bride's parents. Please direct any questions to Christine Miller or her assistant. Do not discuss with other family members or guests. Bea read the memo twice, her expression unchanging, though her heartbeat quickened. The clinical language, the deliberate categorization, the calculation behind each charge, it was all there in black and white. Not a misunderstanding, not an accounting error, a systematic effort to diminish and humiliate. Mrs. Ellison? Clara's voice was gentle. Are you okay? Bea looked up, her composure firmly in place. May I take a photo of this? Marnie nodded. That's why we brought it out. We thought you might want evidence. Evidence. Such a precise word. Thomas would have appreciated it. With steady hands, Bea positioned her phone and captured several clear images of the memo. Do you know if my son and daughter-in-law actually agreed to this? Bea asked, her voice betraying no emotion. Clara and Marnie exchanged glances. We don't know for sure, Clara admitted. But the bride's mother, Monica, she's been with Mrs. Miller constantly. They've been making all the decisions together. I see. Bea handed the memo back to Marnie. Thank you both. I understand the risk you're taking. It's not right, Marnie said simply. My mom waited tables all my life. I know how people like Mrs. Miller see staff, like we're furniture. But we notice everything. Bea smiled slightly. In my experience, those who are overlooked often see the most clearly. What will you do? Clara asked. I haven't decided yet. Bea rose from the table. But knowing the truth is always the first step. As she turned to leave, Marnie touched her arm lightly. Just so you know, we heard the bride asking about you earlier, wondering where you'd gone during the speeches. She notices you, even if the others don't. The words settled in Bea's chest, a small warmth against the chill of the memo's revelations. Lauren noticed. Lauren cared. Whatever happened next, that knowledge mattered. Bea made her way back through the gardens, finding a secluded bench far from the reception's dwindling crowd. From her purse, she withdrew the invoice Christine had handed her and placed it beside her phone, now displaying the memo photo. Side by side, the documents told a story of deliberate exclusion masked as proper accounting. Each line item on the bill corresponded precisely to a point in the memo, the tea demand that had supposedly disrupted the decorators. The table adjustment that separated her from family. The lower quality food served to her table while others enjoyed premium selections. All carefully orchestrated by Christine Miller, with Monica's apparent knowledge and consent. What struck Bea most was the phrase, lower-tier family. It crystallized something she had felt for years but could never quite name, the sense of being categorized, filed away as less important, less deserving of consideration. It reminded her of the library's old card catalog system, where subjects were organized by relevance and importance. Christine had simply made explicit what had long been implied. Beatrice Ellison belonged in the back of the drawer. As she sat there, surrounded by the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the distant sounds of the reception winding down, Bea felt something shift inside her. The initial sting of humiliation had faded, replaced by a clarity that was almost liberating. This wasn't about her shortcomings or failures. This was about power. Who wielded it? Who was subjected to it? For years, she had maintained peace by accepting small indignities. She had stepped back to make room for Monica's insecurities, Daniel's ambitions, the new life they were building that increasingly left little space for her. She had told herself it was what Thomas would have wanted, family harmony above all. But faced with the evidence before her, Bea wondered if she had misinterpreted her late husband's wisdom. Thomas had valued peace, yes, but never at the expense of truth. Never at the cost of dignity. "What would you do, Thomas?" she whispered, running her finger along the edge of the invoice. The answer came not in words, but in a memory. Thomas. In court, calmly dismantling an opposing argument, not with volume or drama, but with meticulous evidence and quiet conviction. Bea tucked both the invoice and her phone back into her purse. Whatever action she took would be measured, deliberate, and grounded in truth. She would not create a scene that might tarnish Lauren's wedding memories. But neither would she allow this calculated slight to stand unchallenged. As she rose from the bench, Bea caught sight of Monica through a reception hall window. Her daughter-in-law stood with Christine, their heads bent together in conversation, their body language suggesting conspiracy and shared satisfaction. The sight solidified Bea's resolve. Tomorrow, after the post-wedding brunch, she would seek a private moment with Monica. Not to accuse or condemn, but to understand. To hear, in Monica's own words, how she justified her role in this manipulation. To discover if there was anything left to salvage between them. Bea straightened her shoulders and smoothed her dress with practiced hands. The knowledge she now possessed was power, not to wound, but to clarify. To re-establish boundaries that had been systematically eroded over years of careful social engineering. She would begin with Monica. And then, when the time was right, she would address Christine Miller and her invoice. Not as a humiliated guest scrambling to explain, but as Beatrice Ellison, widow of Thomas Ellison, grandmother of Lauren, a woman who had spent her life ensuring that information was properly categorized and truth properly preserved. Some books, Bea knew from her years of librarianship, needed to be returned to their proper place on the shelf. Some stories needed to be correctly filed, and some accounts required balancing with a currency more valuable than money: dignity. The post-wedding dinner was scheduled for 7 o'clock the following evening, an intimate gathering for family and select guests who had traveled from out of town. Situated in Oakvale Estate's smaller dining room, it offered a more relaxed atmosphere than the reception, though Bea noted the same careful attention to appearance that characterized all Miller events. She arrived precisely on time, wearing a simple navy dress and the pearl earrings Thomas had given her on their 40th anniversary. The room was arranged with 5 round tables, each set with gleaming silverware and fresh floral centerpieces. A small placard near the entrance displayed the seating arrangement: the Millers and immediate family at the center table, with concentric circles of decreasing importance radiating outward. Bea found her name at table 5, labeled Extended Family and Special Guests. She was seated between an elderly great-aunt of Andrew's who was hard of hearing and an empty chair. Once again, positioned at the periphery. Instead of quietly accepting her assignment, Bea approached the young host stationed at the door. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying clearly. "I believe there's been another seating adjustment. Could you confirm the charges this time? I'd like to know in advance." The host blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry, ma'am." "The fee," Bea clarified, maintaining a pleasant expression. "For my table reassignment, I understand there's typically a $550 charge when I'm moved from family tables." Several nearby guests turned to look, including Christine Miller, who was directing a server about wine selections. Christine's smile froze momentarily before she excused herself and approached with measured steps. "Beatrice, is everything all right?" Her voice was honeyed, her eyes sharp. "Just clarifying the financial arrangements for tonight's seating," Bea replied evenly. "After yesterday's invoice, I thought it prudent to understand any additional charges up front." Christine's smile tightened. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding." Why don't we discuss this privately? No need, B said. I'm quite comfortable with transparency. Table 5 will be lovely. She moved toward her assigned seat, aware of the small ripple of murmurs her exchange had created. As B settled into her chair, she noticed Monica watching from across the room, her expression a mixture of confusion and alarm. Good. Let her wonder. Let them all wonder. When the server approached to take drink orders, B smiled warmly. I'd like to know what beverage options are included with my seating tier, please. I wouldn't want to inadvertently select something that incurs a surcharge. The server glanced nervously toward Christine before mumbling that all beverages were complimentary. B thanked him and requested tea. Hot, if possible. Though I understand that might constitute a disruption fee. The evening proceeded, with B maintaining a quiet but deliberate presence. She conversed politely with Andrew's great-aunt, occasionally raising her voice just enough to ensure their conversation carried. When the first course arrived, she examined it carefully before asking the server, "Is this the standard or premium selection? I want to be sure I'm receiving what's appropriate for my table designation." From across the room, she could see Daniel shifting uncomfortably in his seat, while Christine maintained a rigid smile. Monica, however, seemed increasingly agitated, her eyes darting between B and Christine as the meal progressed. It was during the entree course that Monica finally rose from her seat and approached table 5. She leaned down beside B, her voice low but strained. "Mom, could we speak privately for a moment?" B dabbed her lips with her napkin and nodded. "Of course, dear." They moved to a small alcove adjacent to the dining room, partially screened by a decorative lattice. Monica's carefully maintained composure was beginning to fray, her fingers twisting the napkin she still clutched. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "These comments about charges and tiers. People are noticing." "Yes," B agreed calmly. "Transparency often draws attention." Monica's expression tightened. "If this is about that invoice Christine gave you, you knew about it then." It wasn't a question. Monica looked away. Christine handles all the financial arrangements. She felt it was appropriate given the circumstances. What circumstances would those be? B's voice remained level, though her gaze was unwavering. You know how these events work. Everyone contributes. Everyone has responsibilities. Monica's words tumbled out, practiced excuses that sounded hollow even to her own ears. The Millers have covered so much. It seemed reasonable that you would handle certain incidentals related to your requirements. My requirements, B repeated. Such as requesting tea? Or perhaps my requirement to be seated away from my family? Monica's cheeks flushed. The seating arrangements were complicated. There were protocols, expectations. "I have the memo, Monica." The simple statement landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. Monica's expression shifted from defensive to uncertain. "What memo?" B reached into her purse and removed her phone, turning it to show Monica the photographed document. "The internal staff memo detailing my reclassification as lower-tier family, the one outlining each charge on that invoice, the one noting that you and Daniel were informed of these arrangements." Monica stared at the screen, her face draining of color. "I didn't. This isn't." She took a breath, regrouping. "Christine mentioned some adjustments, but I didn't know the details. The wedding was so complicated, and she has experience with these high-end events." "Is that how we do family now, Monica? With invoices and tier designations?" B's question was soft but penetrating. Monica's composure cracked. "You've never understood the pressure. From the moment I married Daniel, I've felt your disapproval, your quiet judgment of every decision, every aspiration. You didn't have to say it." Monica's voice rose slightly before she caught herself, glancing toward the dining room. It was in every careful suggestion, every gentle reminder of how Thomas would have done things, how the Ellisons had always managed without ostentation or ambition. Bea felt a flicker of recognition. Had her efforts to preserve Thomas's values been perceived as criticism? Had her silence, meant to avoid conflict, created space for resentment to grow? The way you look at our house, our friends, Monica continued, gaining momentum. Like we're somehow betraying something sacred by wanting more than a modest practice and a library card. You never approved of my background, my family. That's not true, Bea interjected. I welcomed you from the beginning. You tolerated me. Monica's eyes glistened. There's a difference. I was never going to be good enough for your precious son, your perfect granddaughter. Not cultured enough, not intellectual enough. Just the daughter of a real estate agent from Charlottesville who wanted more for her family. The raw emotion in Monica's voice gave Bea pause. Was this truly how her daughter-in-law had interpreted their relationship for all these years? Had Bea's attempts to respect their independence been read as cold judgment? Monica, Bea said carefully, whatever misunderstandings have existed, between us, they don't justify this. She gestured to the phone, categorizing me as lower-tier family, billing me for the privilege of being excluded, allowing Christine Miller to orchestrate my humiliation. Monica looked away, shame finally piercing her defensive anger. The Millers operate differently than we're used to. Christine believes in clear boundaries, clear expectations. When she suggested handling your participation this way, it seemed efficient. Efficient, Bea echoed, the word hollow. You don't understand how important this connection is for Daniel's practice, for Lauren's future. The Millers know everyone who matters in this state. Monica's voice took on a pleading quality. Sometimes compromises are necessary. Sometimes old ways need to give way to new opportunities. And I represent the old ways, Bea said quietly. Monica didn't deny it. You're from a different generation, with different priorities. Christine thought, we thought, it would be easier this way. Cleaner. Bea studied her daughter-in-law, seeing beyond the defensive posture to the insecurity beneath. Monica had spent years feeling judged by standards she didn't understand and couldn't meet. Rather than addressing that perceived gap, she had allied herself with Christine Miller, whose wealth and social position offered validation Monica had never felt from the Ellison family. It was a revelation that brought no satisfaction, only a complicated sadness. Their relationship had fractured not through any single catastrophic break, but through years of small misinterpretations and quiet withdrawals. Both of them had retreated to safer ground rather than crossing the divide. I see, Bea said finally. Thank you for your honesty. Monica seemed startled by the simple response. That's it? You're not going to make a scene? Demand an apology? No. Bea's voice held no anger, only a quiet certainty. But I won't be accepting that invoice either. And I think we both know now where we stand. Monica's expression shifted, uncertainty replacing defensiveness. She had prepared for anger, for accusations, not for this calm acknowledgement of a breach that could not be easily repaired. What will you do? She asked. I haven't decided yet, Bea replied, echoing her response to Clara and Marnie. But I believe in calling things by their proper names. What's happened here has a name, Monica. Several, in fact. None of them have anything to do with wedding etiquette or financial propriety. Monica flinched at the implicit rebuke. We should return to dinner, Bea said, straightening her shoulders. People will notice our absence. As they moved back toward the dining room, Monica paused. Please don't mention the memo to Lauren. This weekend means everything to... I would never diminish Lauren's joy, Bea replied. Which is why I've been sitting at table 19 and now table 5 without complaint. But don't mistake my restraint for acceptance. They re-entered the dining room separately, Monica returning to her seat beside Daniel at the center table, Bea to her place at the periphery. Christine Miller watched their return with calculated interest, her gaze lingering on Monica's shaken expression. Bea met Christine's eyes briefly, allowing a moment of silent acknowledgement to pass between them. "This is not finished," that look said. "This is merely beginning." The remainder of the dinner passed without further incident. Bea participated in polite conversation, applauded the speeches, and smiled appropriately for photographs. But something had shifted irrevocably. The weight of unspoken accommodation had lifted, replaced by the clear-eyed understanding that silence had served no one well. As she prepared to leave, Bea caught sight of Lauren, radiant in her happiness, leaning against Andrew as they thanked guests for coming. For her granddaughter's sake, Bea would proceed with care, but proceed she would. Some debts, after all, required settlement in currencies more precise than cash. After her confrontation with Monica, Bea found herself needing space, a moment to gather her thoughts away from watchful eyes and calculated smiles. The post-wedding dinner was winding down, guests dispersing toward their rooms or the venue's outdoor fire pits where nightcaps were being served. No one seemed to notice as Bea slipped away, following a discreet sign pointing toward the estate's library lounge. The room was a testament to someone's idea of old-world charm, leather-bound books arranged by color rather than content, hunting. Prints in gilded frames, wing chairs that looked more decorative than comfortable. But it was quiet and dimly lit, offering the solitude Bea craved. She settled into a chair by the window overlooking the darkened gardens, finally allowing her shoulders to relax. The conversation with Monica had left her emotionally drained, not because of any raised voices or dramatic revelations, but because of the quiet tragedy it had exposed, years of misunderstanding calcified into mutual resentment. Monica had seen judgment where Bea had intended respect. Bea had perceived rejection where Monica had felt insecurity. And in that gap between intention and perception, Christine Miller had found fertile ground to plant her seeds of division. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" Bea looked up to find an older gentleman gesturing to the chair opposite hers. He was tall and lean, with silver hair neatly combed and a bow tie slightly askew beneath a kindly face. Something about him seemed familiar, though Bea couldn't immediately place him. "Please," she said, indicating the chair, "I'd welcome the company." He settled into the seat with a grateful sigh. "These events can be exhausting at our age, can't they? All that standing around, pretending we're not counting the minutes until we can sit down." His candor drew a genuine smile from Bea. "I was just thinking something similar." "Robert Ashby," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "Though you might remember me as Bobby. It's been quite some time, Beatrice." Recognition dawned. "Judge Ashby, from Thomas's circuit court days?" His smile deepened, revealing laugh lines earned over decades. "The very same. Though I'm long retired now. Just plain old Robert these days." "I didn't see you at the ceremony." "Or reception," Bea said, her librarian's memory scanning the guest list she had discreetly reviewed. "I was seated rather far back at both," he admitted with a wry smile. "Arrived just this morning on Lauren's invitation. She tracked me down, about a month ago, said she wanted someone here who knew her grandfather, who remembered the kind of man Thomas was." Something warm unfurled in Bea's chest at this revelation. "Lauren did that?" Robert nodded. "Bright young woman, your granddaughter. Called my office out of the blue, introduced herself as Thomas Ellison's granddaughter, and said she wanted to surprise you with a face from the old days. I couldn't refuse." "She never mentioned it," Bea said softly. "She wanted it to be a surprise. Though I suspect she intended us to connect before now." He gestured to the library. "I've been rather relegated to the outer circles of this gathering. Seems there's quite a hierarchy at play." Bea studied him, this ghost from her past. Robert Ashby had been one of Thomas's closest colleagues, a principled judge who had mentored her husband during his early career. They had shared meals in Bee's dining room, debated ethics late into the night, their voices rumbling through the house while Bee prepared coffee and listened from the doorway. Robert had attended Thomas's funeral, had spoken eloquently about integrity and quiet strength. "It's good to see you, Robert," she said sincerely. "Likewise, Beatrice. Though I must admit, I've been concerned watching how these proceedings have unfolded. There's been a disturbing undercurrent I can't quite place." Bee hesitated, weighing her words. "What have you observed?" Robert leaned forward slightly. "Well, for one thing, this peculiar system they seem to have implemented. Guests arranged in concentric circles of importance. I overheard someone mention tiering as if it were perfectly normal to rank wedding guests like investment opportunities." His frank assessment broke through Bee's careful reserve. A small laugh escaped her, surprising them both. "I'm sorry," she said, collecting herself. "It's just refreshing to hear someone else notice. Hard to miss, particularly when you've spent a career observing human behavior from the bench." His eyes, still sharp despite his age, studied her. "But you've noticed more than most, I'd wager." The moment stretched between them, an invitation to confidence, to shared understanding. Bee made a decision. "I received an invoice yesterday," she said quietly, during the reception. Robert's eyebrows rose. "An invoice? For what, precisely?" "For existing inconveniently." Bee reached into her purse and withdrew both the bill and her phone with the photographed memo. "For requiring tea, for occupying space, for needing to be seated somewhere." She passed them to Robert, who examined each with growing disbelief. His expression darkened as he read the internal memo with its clinical categorization of lower tier, family. "This is," he began, then stopped, searching for the right word. "This is unconscionable." "It's calculated," Bee agreed, "and apparently approved by my son and daughter-in-law." Robert set the documents on the small table between them, his disgust evident. Thomas would have been livid. "Yes," Bee said simply, "he would have. Not just at the insulting premise of billing family members for their presence, but at the methodology. This memo," he tapped it with one finger, "this is a deliberate attempt to enforce class distinctions within a family, to codify who matters and who doesn't. It's reprehensible." His indignation was validating in a way Bee hadn't realized she needed. After years of questioning her own perceptions, of wondering if she was simply failing to adapt to changing times, here was someone who saw the situation with the same moral clarity she felt. "The mother of the groom orchestrated it," Bee explained. "Christine Miller. But my daughter-in-law knew, at least in part. We spoke earlier this evening." "And your son, Daniel?" Bee's gaze drifted to the window. "I haven't confronted him directly, but his absence from my defense speaks volumes." Robert was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "Thomas always said you were the true strength in your partnership. Bee's steel runs deeper than mine, he told me once. She just keeps it quieter." The mention of Thomas's words brought both pain and comfort. "Did he really say that?" "Often." Robert smiled gently. "He admired your composure, your ability to hold firm without raising your voice. But he also worried sometimes." "About what?" "That you might internalize things too deeply. That your strength in silence might become a habit of silence, even when speaking up was needed." Bee felt something shift inside her, a recognition of truth. How many times had she chosen restraint over confrontation? How often had she prioritized peace over her own dignity? What had begun as strength had perhaps calcified into a pattern of accommodation that served no one well. "What would you do, Robert, if you were in my position?" She asked the question not from uncertainty, but from a desire to hear the perspective of someone who had known Thomas, who understood the values they had shared. Robert considered for a moment. I would remember that dignity and disappearance aren't the same thing. One can stand firmly in one's truth without creating a spectacle. That's what I've been trying to balance, Bea admitted. I don't want to tarnish Lauren's memories of her wedding weekend, but I can't simply accept this erasure. Nor should you. Robert's voice took on the measured cadence that had likely served him well on the bench. Thomas believed in proportional responses, in addressing wrongs directly but appropriately. I confronted Monica earlier, Bea said, but I haven't decided how to handle Christine Miller and her invoice. What did you learn from Monica? Bea sighed. That she's felt judged by me for years, that she sees me as representing an old way of life that stands in opposition to her ambitions, that she perceives my restraint as disapproval. Robert nodded thoughtfully. Perceptions become realities when they're left unchallenged over time. Yes, Bea agreed, and in that silence, Christine found room to maneuver, to position herself as the arbiter of family status. They sat quietly for a moment, the weight of years and misunderstandings settling between them. Through the window, Bea could see guests gathered around the fire pits, their laughter carrying faintly through the glass. Lauren was among them, her head resting against Andrew's shoulder. She looked happy, at ease. Your granddaughter sought me out because she values connection to the past, Robert observed, following Bea's gaze. To Thomas's legacy. That speaks volumes about what truly matters to her, regardless of the trappings of this weekend. The observation rekindled something in Bea, a reminder that legacy wasn't measured in table placements or reception menus, but in values transmitted across generations. Lauren had reached back, had sought to include a piece of Thomas in her celebration. I've been too focused on my exclusion, Bea realized, when I should have been recognizing my inclusion where it matters most, in Lauren's heart. Precisely. Robert leaned forward. And that's why you need to address this situation directly, not just for yourself, but for her. For what she deserves to understand about dignity, about family, about standing up when it matters. But how? I won't create a scene. Scenes are for those without substance, Robert interrupted gently. Thomas never needed theatrics to make his point in court. He simply stated truth with unwavering conviction. Bea felt a clarity beginning to form, a path forward that honored both her need for truth and her desire to preserve Lauren's joy. There's a brunch tomorrow morning, before everyone departs. Guests will be invited to share memories, advice for the couple. Robert's eyes brightened. A perfect opportunity to speak truth wrapped in wisdom. Not to accuse, Bea continued, the idea taking shape, but to illuminate, to name what matters without naming those who don't understand its value. The truth rarely needs volume to be heard, Robert quoted. Thomas used to say that before closing arguments. Bea smiled, feeling more like herself than she had since arriving at Oakvale Estate. I remember. As they continued talking, the years between their last meeting and this chance encounter seemed to dissolve. Robert shared stories of cases he and Thomas had discussed, of principles they had upheld together. Bea offered memories of Thomas at home, his quiet certainty, his bedrock belief in fairness over status. In Robert's presence, Bea felt the weight of the weekend's calculated slights beginning to lift. Not because they mattered less, but because they mattered differently. They were no longer personal humiliations to be endured, but challenges to values worth defending. Dignity doesn't mean disappearing, Beatrice, Robert said as they finally rose to return to their rooms. It means knowing exactly who you are, and ensuring others know it too. Bea nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Thank you for being here, Robert. For being a witness to what was and what still matters. Thank your granddaughter, he replied, She understood what this weekend needed. A touchstone to truth. As they parted in the corridor, Bea felt a certainty she hadn't experienced since Thomas's death. Tomorrow, at the brunch, she would speak. Not in anger or accusation, but in clarity and conviction. She would offer Lauren, and everyone present, a glimpse of what legacy truly meant. Not the Miller version of status and appearance, but the Ellison understanding of substance and character. Christine's invoice and memo had been meant to diminish. Instead, they had illuminated a path back to herself, to the woman Thomas had recognized as steel beneath silk. To the grandmother Lauren had sought to honor by including Robert Ashby in her celebration. Sometimes, Bea reflected as she prepared for bed, the most powerful response to attempted erasure was simply to exist more fully, more visibly, more authentically than before. To reclaim not just one's space, but one's voice. Sunday morning dawned. Bright and clear, the Virginia countryside bathed in golden light that softened the edges of Oakvale Estate's manicured perfection. Bea woke early, her night's sleep having been surprisingly restful. The clarity that had come from her conversation with Robert Ashby had settled something within her. A return to center, to purpose. She dressed with particular care in a pale, blue suit that Thomas had always admired, adding her mother's cameo brooch and pearl earrings. Her reflection showed a woman of 74 years who had weathered loss and joy, who had maintained her composure through decades of subtle erosion. Today, that composure would serve not as a shield behind which to retreat, but as a foundation from which to speak. The farewell brunch was set in the estate's sunroom, a glass-enclosed space overlooking gardens now vibrant with morning light. Round tables were arranged more casually than at previous events, though Bea noted Christine Miller still hovered near the door, subtly directing guests to their appropriate locations. Bea bypassed her entirely, selecting a seat with a clear view of the head table where Lauren and Andrew would sit. As guests filled the room, Bea observed the dynamics with fresh eyes. Christine moved through the space like a conductor, her subtle gestures and glances orchestrating the social hierarchy she had so carefully constructed. Monica followed in her wake, echoing Christine's smiles and murmured greetings like an apprentice studying a masterclass in social engineering. Daniel worked the room separately, his lawyer's charm evident in firm handshakes and practiced laughter. "Good morning, Beatrice." Robert Ashby appeared beside her table, bow tie perfectly straight today. "May I join you?" "Please," Bea said, warmly, grateful for his presence. As they exchanged pleasantries, Lauren and Andrew entered to gentle applause. Bea felt a surge of love for her granddaughter, who looked radiant despite what must have been an exhausting weekend. Lauren scanned the room, her face brightening when she spotted Bea. She whispered something to Andrew, then made her way directly to Bea's table. "Grandma," Lauren said, leaning down to embrace her. "I've barely had a chance to talk with you. Properly." "It's your weekend, dear. I didn't expect to monopolize your time." Lauren's expression flickered with something like regret. "Still, I wanted to—" She stopped, noticing Robert. "Judge Ashby, you found my grandmother." "Indeed I did, though rather later than intended," Robert replied, rising to accept Lauren's quick hug. "I'm so glad." Lauren turned back to Bea. "This was supposed to be a surprise, having someone here who knew Grandpa Thomas." "It was a wonderful surprise," Bea assured her. "We had a lovely conversation last night." Lauren beamed. "Good. I wanted—" She hesitated, glancing toward the Millers, who were watching their interaction with barely concealed interest. "I wanted something real here, something that mattered." The simple statement, heavy with meaning, touched Bea deeply. Before she could respond, Andrew appeared at Lauren's side, his hand settling possessively at the small of her back. "Lauren, your mother's looking for you. Something about the gift display." Lauren nodded, though Bea noted a brief flash of resistance in her eyes. "I'll be right back, Grandma. Save me a seat?" As Lauren moved away, Andrew lingered, his gaze coolly assessing as he nodded to Bea and Robert. Mrs. Ellison. Judge. Enjoying the festivities? Very illuminating, Robert replied pleasantly. Andrew's smile didn't reach his eyes. Indeed. Well, if you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. We want all our guests properly accommodated. His emphasis on properly was subtle, but unmistakable. After he departed, Robert leaned closer. To Bea. That young man seems very aware of the memo's contents. Yes, Bea agreed quietly. I suspect he and Christine are quite aligned in their approach to family management. The brunch proceeded with the relaxed efficiency that characterized Miller events. Servers circulating with mimosas and coffee, a lavish buffet offering everything from smoked salmon to Belgian waffles. Christine made her way to the center of the room, tapping a spoon against her champagne flute to gain attention. Before we all enjoy this wonderful meal, Andrew and I would like to thank everyone for being part of this special weekend. She began, her voice carrying that practiced warmth that never quite reached her eyes. As is tradition at Miller family gatherings, we've set aside time this morning for loved ones to offer any final words of wisdom or special memories for the couple before they depart for their honeymoon. A carefully selected progression of speakers followed. Andrew's father offering financial advice thinly disguised as marriage counsel. Monica sharing an anecdote about Lauren's childhood that somehow centered on Monica's own maternal insight. Daniel delivering what sounded suspiciously like a closing argument on the merits of strategic partnership. As the formal remarks concluded, Christine prepared to smoothly transition to the meal portion of the event. But Lauren suddenly stood, her voice clear and determined. Before we eat, I'd like to ask my grandmother to say a few words. She turned toward Bea, her expression open and expectant. Grandma Bea has been my anchor through so much of my life. I'd love to hear her thoughts. The request clearly hadn't been part of Christine's carefully orchestrated program. Her smile froze momentarily before she recovered. Of course. How thoughtful. Mrs. Ellison, would you care to offer some brief remarks? The emphasis on brief wasn't lost on Bea, nor was the flicker of alarm that passed between Christine and Monica. They had assumed Bea would maintain her usual silence, would accept her designated role as peripheral witness rather than active participant. Robert's hand briefly touched Bea's arm as she rose. Dignity, not disappearance, he murmured. Bea moved to the small open area where previous speakers had stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced hands. She looked first at Lauren, anchoring, herself in the genuine love reflected in her granddaughter's eyes, before allowing her gaze to sweep across the assembled guests. Thank you, Lauren, for this opportunity, she began, her voice clear and steady. And thank you to everyone present for being part of what has been, without question, the most revealing celebration I have ever attended. A ripple of uncertainty passed through the room at her word choice. Christine's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. When my late husband Thomas and I were married 57 years ago, Bea continued, we had a simple ceremony in my parents' backyard. My mother made chicken salad sandwiches. Thomas's law school roommate played violin badly but enthusiastically. We drank punch from mismatched glasses and danced until the neighbors complained. She paused, allowing the image to settle. There were no chandeliers, no 5-course meals, no carefully designated seating tiers. Just people who loved each other, celebrating people who loved each other. Monica shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Daniel studied his water glass with sudden intensity. Thomas used to say that the measure of any event, and indeed any life, was not what it appeared to be, but what it revealed about our values. Bea's gaze moved deliberately from the Millers to Lauren. This weekend has been exceptionally revealing. Christine's hand tightened around her champagne flute. I've observed how easily we can confuse appearance with substance, Bea continued. How we can mistake the trappings of celebration for the purpose of gathering. How, sometimes, we can become so focused on managing perceptions that we forget to honor connections. The room had grown very still, guests sensing the undercurrent beneath Bee's measured words. "Lauren," Bee said, turning directly to her granddaughter, "you invited Judge Ashby to this celebration because you wanted someone present who knew your grandfather, who understood the values he lived by. That choice reveals something profound about you, something no expertly arranged floral display or premium menu selection could ever convey." Lauren's eyes glistened as she nodded. "In a weekend filled with careful categorizations and precise accounting," Bee continued, her voice warming, "you created space for something that cannot be invoiced or cataloged, genuine connection across time and circumstance." At the word invoiced, Christine's composure finally slipped. Her smile faltered, her fingers whitening around her glass. Monica stared fixedly at the tablecloth. Andrew's expression darkened as he glanced between Bee and his mother. "My gift to you both," Bee said, addressing Lauren and Andrew directly, "is not wrapped in expensive paper or tied with a perfect bow. It is simply this truth. Your worth is not measured in chandeliers or curated menus, but in what you choose to see and what you choose to ignore, in what you decide to invoice and what you recognize as beyond price." She held Lauren's gaze, allowing the deeper message to land. True legacy isn't passed through monogrammed silver or family names on buildings. It's transmitted through the quiet choices we make when no one is looking, or when everyone is looking but not truly seeing. Bee smiled gently. "My Thomas would have told you that dignity costs nothing, requires no special accommodation, and never needs to be itemized on a spreadsheet. It simply exists, unmoved by attempts to categorize or diminish it." She lifted her water glass in a toast. "To you both, then. May you build a life rich in substance rather than appearance. May you measure success not by what you acquire, but by what you recognize as invaluable. And may you always have the wisdom to distinguish between those who see your worth and those who calculate your cost." A stunned silence followed as Bee returned to her seat. Lauren's eyes were wide, her expression a mixture of revelation and dawning understanding. Robert Ashby nodded slightly, approval evident in his posture. Across the room, Christine maintained her social smile, though it had calcified into something brittle and forced. After a moment that stretched like glass about to shatter, Andrew's father broke the silence with a too-loud comment about the excellent weather for the couple's honeymoon departure. Conversation gradually resumed, though it carried an undercurrent of confusion and reassessment. Lauren's gaze remained on Bee, something new awakening in her expression. A recognition, perhaps, of currents that had been flowing beneath the surface of this celebration, of her family, for years. Christine rose quickly, moving to the center of the room again. "What lovely sentiments," she said, her voice slightly higher than usual. "And now, please, everyone enjoy this wonderful brunch before we bid the happy couple farewell." As guests moved toward the buffet, creating a welcome distraction, Bee felt a profound sense of peace settle within her. She had not created a scene. She had not named names or pointed fingers. She had simply spoken truth wrapped in the dignified language of values, allowing those with ears to hear the deeper message beneath. "Well done," Robert murmured beside her. "Thomas would have been proud." "Yes," Bee agreed, watching as Lauren whispered something urgent to Andrew, who appeared to be disagreeing. "I think he would have." Across the room, Monica was engaged in intense conversation with Daniel, her gestures suggesting distress. Christine had cornered a server, issuing what appeared to be sharp instructions, her composure visibly fraying at the edges. But it was Lauren's expression that held Bee's attention. The thoughtful focus, the subtle straightening of her shoulders, the way she gently but firmly disengaged from Andrew's attempt to guide her toward his parents. Something had shifted. In her granddaughter's understanding, some piece falling into place. I believe, Robert observed quietly, that your words found their intended target. Not a target, Robert, Bea corrected gently. A recipient. There's a difference. He smiled. Indeed there is. One seeks to wound, the other seeks to illuminate. Illumination had been her purpose, not revenge or humiliation, but truth, spoken with sufficient clarity that it could no longer be ignored or repackaged, or filed away as irrelevant. She had offered Lauren a glimpse of what lay beneath the polished surface of this celebration. The calculations, the categorizations, the cold equations of social advantage measured against family connection. What Lauren would do with that glimpse remained to be seen. But as her granddaughter made her way determinedly across the room, eyes fixed on Bea with newfound purpose, it was clear that something important had been set in motion, something that could not be undone with social smiles or careful deflections. Truth, once spoken, created its own momentum, and dignity, once reclaimed, could not easily be diminished again. The farewell brunch concluded with practiced efficiency, the Miller family orchestrating goodbyes and coordinating departures with the same precision they had applied to every aspect of the weekend. Bea observed it all from a quiet corner, accepting the occasional parting handshake or embrace from departing guests, many of whom regarded her with newfound curiosity after her speech. Christine Miller maintained her distance, her social smile fixed in place like armor. Monica fluttered between groups, her laughter a touch too bright, her gestures slightly too animated. Daniel moved in Christine's orbit, occasionally glancing toward Bea with an expression she couldn't quite read. Discomfort, perhaps, or the first stirrings of shame. As the crowd thinned, Bea prepared for her own departure. She had arranged for a car service to take her home, declining Daniel and Monica's perfunctory offer to drive her. Some boundaries, once clarified, needed to remain intact. Grandma? Lauren appeared beside her, still in her pale blue brunch dress, but with her hair now pulled back into a simple ponytail. Can we talk before you go? Somewhere private? The key. Request was earnest, Lauren's expression a mixture of confusion and determination. Bea nodded, gathering her purse. Of course, dear. Lauren guided her through the venue to a small sitting room off the main corridor, closing the door behind them. The space was intimate but formal, another carefully curated backdrop for Miller family moments. Lauren paced briefly before settling beside Bea on a small settee. Your speech, she began, her voice quiet but intent. It wasn't just about wedding. Wisdom, was it? Bea studied her granddaughter, this young woman on the threshold of her married life, caught between families with fundamentally different values. She deserved truth, not protection through omission. No, Bea admitted. It wasn't. Lauren took a deep breath. What was it really about, Grandma? What happened this weekend? The moment stretched between them, a crossroads of truth and consequence. Bea had maintained her silence for years, had absorbed countless small indignities to preserve family peace. But that silence had served no one well. Certainly not Lauren, who sat now with eyes wide and expectant, seeking understanding. During the reception, Bea began carefully, Christine gave me an envelope. Inside was an invoice for what she called reception add-ons, charges totaling nearly $3,500. Lauren blinked. An invoice? For what? For existing inconveniently, Bea replied, her voice steady. For asking for tea when I arrived, for being seated far from the family, for receiving standard rather than premium food and service. That makes no sense, Lauren protested. Why would she? Because it was never about money, Bea said gently. It was about establishing hierarchy, about making explicit what has been implicit for years, that I am considered peripheral to your life, an obligation rather than family. Lauren's eyes filled with tears. That's not true. You're not peripheral to me. I know that, dear. Bea reached for her hand. But others have worked very hard to create distance between us, to position themselves as the proper influence in your life. Mom? Lauren asked, her voice small. Bea hesitated, then nodded. Your mother has allied herself with Christine. They share certain views about status and appearance. I don't understand. Lauren's brow furrowed. Mom? Would never— There's more, Bea said gently. She removed her phone from her purse and pulled up the photograph of the memo. This is an internal document from the venue staff. It outlines in detail how I was to be treated differently from other family members. Lauren took the phone, her expression shifting from confusion to shock as she read. Lower-tier family designation? Client confirmed this arrangement has been communicated to bride's parents? Her voice rose with each phrase. This can't be real. I'm afraid it is, Bea said. The venue staff shared it with me. They were as disturbed by it as you are. Lauren's hands trembled slightly as she continued reading. This memo. It's signed with Christine's initials. And it says my parents knew about this? That's what it indicates, Bea confirmed, though your mother claims she didn't know the specifics. Lauren set the phone down carefully, as if it might shatter. All weekend? I've been so caught up in the celebration, so busy with guests and photos and I didn't see— Her voice broke. I didn't see what was happening to you. You weren't meant to see, Bea assured her. The best manipulations are the ones that remain invisible to those who matter most. Lauren's expression hardened, a transformation that reminded Bea suddenly, powerfully, of Thomas. I want to see the invoice, too. Bea withdrew it from her purse, watching as Lauren examined each line item, her jaw tightening with each calculated charge. Guest disruption accommodation, my 200? Lauren read incredulously. For asking for tea? Apparently my request interrupted the decorator's concentration, Bea explained, unable to keep a hint of dry humor from her voice. A very costly cup of tea, it seems. Lauren didn't smile. This isn't funny, Grandma. This is cruel. Yes, Bea agreed. Simply, it is. And Dad just let this happen? He didn't say anything? The pain in Lauren's voice was unmistakable, the first crack in her understanding of her father, of her family's dynamics. Bea chose her words with care. Your father has made choices over the years about where his loyalties lie, about which battles are worth fighting. And I wasn't paying attention, Lauren whispered. All these years I didn't see what was happening right in front of me. You were a child, Lauren, Bea reminded her gently, and then a young woman discovering your own path. It wasn't your responsibility to monitor the undercurrents of adult relationships. But this weekend was my wedding, Lauren insisted, her voice gaining strength. My celebration, and it was used as some kind of power play, a way to put you in your place. She stood abruptly, pacing the small room. That's what your speech was about, wasn't it? All that talk about what we choose to see and ignore, about invoicing and worth. Yes, Bea acknowledged, though I had no desire to create a scene or diminish your happiness. Lauren stopped pacing, turning to face her grandmother with new resolve. You didn't diminish anything. You opened my eyes. The moment hung between them, a granddaughter seeing clearly for perhaps the first time, a grandmother allowing herself to be truly seen after years of careful restraint. I need to talk to Andrew, Lauren said suddenly. He must have known about this. His mother wouldn't have done something this calculated without his knowledge. Perhaps, Bea agreed carefully. But before you do, I want you to understand something important. I'm not telling you this to create division between you and your new husband, or between you and your parents. Then why tell me now? Lauren asked, genuine confusion in her voice. Because there comes a point where silence becomes complicity, B replied. Where protecting others from truth denies them the chance to make informed choices, to be their best selves. Lauren considered this, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. You think I can change things, that knowing the truth gives me power to fix this. I think knowledge always offers choices, B said. What you do with that? Knowledge is entirely yours to decide. Lauren nodded slowly, then sat again beside B. I'm so sorry, Grandma, for not seeing, for being part of something that hurt you. You have nothing to apologize for, B assured her. Your joy this weekend was genuine. Your inclusion of Judge Ashby was thoughtful beyond measure. You've done nothing wrong. But I've been complicit by not paying attention, Lauren insisted, by accepting the narrative I was given about family priorities, about who matters and how. The insight struck B with its maturity, its recognition of the passive role Lauren had played in allowing others to shape her understanding of family dynamics. When Mom suggested we seat you at table 19 instead of with immediate family, I didn't question it, Lauren continued, her voice thick with regret. She said you'd be more comfortable away from the chaos of the head tables, that it was a kindness, not an exclusion. A convincing framing, B observed. But I should have seen through it, Lauren insisted. I've watched for years how she and Dad position you at the edges of family events. I just never connected the dots. We see what we're prepared to see, B said gently. And you've been raised to accept certain patterns as normal. Lauren's expression hardened with new resolve. Well, I'm seeing clearly now, and this, she gestured to the invoice and phone, this isn't normal or acceptable. She stood again, straightening her shoulders in a gesture so reminiscent of Thomas that it made B's heart ache. I'm going to talk to Andrew, today, before we leave for our honeymoon. He needs to understand that this isn't how my family, my real family, operates. Lauren, B cautioned, anger rarely leads to understanding. I'm not angry, Grandma. I'm awake. Lauren's voice steadied. And I need to know if my husband is someone who would approve of charging his wife's grandmother for the privilege of attending their wedding. Before B could respond, Lauren added, and I'm changing how I sign our name legally. It's going to be Lauren Ellison Miller. I'm an Ellison first. The declaration, simple but profound, moved something deep within B. Not triumph or vindication, but a quiet recognition of continuity, of values transmitted despite efforts to sever them. Wait, B said, reaching into her purse one final time. She withdrew a small, worn leather box. Before you go, I have something for you. I was saving it for a quiet moment. Lauren's anger softened as she accepted the box. Opening it, she revealed an antique brass compass, its face yellowed with age, but its needle still responsive, spinning briefly before settling to point north. This was your grandfather's, B explained. He carried it through law school, through his early career when he was finding his way. He said it reminded him that integrity wasn't about following others' paths, but about knowing your own true north. Lauren cradled the compass gently, running her finger over the worn initials engraved on its back. T.E. He would have given it to you himself, B continued, if he'd lived to see the remarkable woman you've become. Not because you're perfect or because you never make mistakes, but because you have the courage to recognize truth when you see it, and to realign your path accordingly. Lauren closed the compass carefully, clutching it in her palm. Thank you, Grandma, for the compass, for the truth, for, her voice caught, for never giving up on me, even when everyone was trying to separate us. That was never an option, B said simply. Some connections exist beyond anyone's ability to sever them. They embraced, the moment crystallizing something that neither Christine's machinations nor Monica's insecurities could touch, the genuine bond between them, strengthened now by shared understanding rather than weakened by polite fictions. When they separated, Lauren's expression had transformed, determination replacing hurt, clarity replacing confusion. "I need to find Andrew now. We're supposed to leave for the airport in an hour. Be gentle but firm," Bea advised. "Listen. As much as you speak." Lauren nodded, tucking the compass into her pocket. "And you? What will you do?" Bea thought of the invoice, still unpaid, of Christine Miller, who had orchestrated this weekend's careful humiliations, of the reckoning that remained. "I have one more conversation to have," she said simply. "One final account to settle." Understanding passed between them. Granddaughter to grandmother, inheritance not of wealth, but of principle. Lauren squeezed Bea's hand once more before straightening her shoulders and moving toward the door with newfound purpose. As the door closed behind her, Bea remained seated for a moment, absorbing the significance of what had just transpired. For years, she had maintained her silence out of fear of creating division, of being labeled difficult, of losing what tenuous connection she had with Lauren. But in speaking truth, she had not destroyed connection. She had deepened it, had made possible a relationship based on authentic understanding rather than managed perceptions. Now, only one piece of business remained. One final conversation, to have before she left Oakvale Estate and its carefully curated illusions behind. Bea gathered her belongings and rose, her mind clear, her purpose defined. It was time to speak with Christine Miller about outstanding balances, both financial and morale. After Lauren departed to find Andrew, Bea remained in the sitting room, gathering both her thoughts and her resolve. The conversation with her granddaughter had crystallized something important. This final encounter with Christine Miller wasn't about vengeance or even vindication. It was about completion, about closing a circle that had been left open too long. From her purse, Bea withdrew a small note card she had prepared that morning. The stationery was her own, cream-colored with a simple B monogram at the top, a gift from Thomas years ago, used sparingly and only for significant correspondence. Her handwriting was neat and precise, the words carefully chosen. Etiquette is no excuse for cruelty. This bill was never about money. It was about message. Here's mine. Dignity cannot be invoiced, diminished, or categorized. It simply is. Beatrice Ellison. She slipped the note card into the envelope containing Christine's original invoice, added a printed copy of the staff memo, and sealed it. Then she checked her watch, just after noon. The Miller family would be preparing to depart soon, supervising the packing of wedding gifts and ensuring every detail of the weekend concluded as perfectly as it had begun. With practiced composure, Bea made her way through the venue's corridors, nodding politely to staff members who seemed to regard her with newfound respect after her brunch speech. She had asked Clara earlier about the Millers' whereabouts and learned that Christine was coordinating final details from the bridal suite, the command center from which she had orchestrated the weekend's elaborate performance of wealth and status. Bea knocked firmly on the suite door, standing straight with shoulders relaxed. After a moment, the door opened to reveal Christine, phone in hand, mid-conversation with someone about transportation arrangements. She paused when she saw Bea, a flicker of surprise quickly masked by her professional hostess smile. "Beatrice, I'm rather busy at the moment with departure logistics." "This will only take a moment," Bea replied pleasantly but firmly. "May I come in?" Something in Bea's tone, perhaps its unaccustomed assertiveness, gave Christine pause. After a brief hesitation, she stepped back, allowing Bea to enter the suite. The room was a study in controlled chaos. Designer luggage stood, packed and ready by the door. Garment bags hung carefully over a valet stand. On the large central table, Christine had arranged what appeared to be a command station, laptop open, clipboard with checklists, several phones for coordinating different aspects of the departure. "I wanted to return this to you personally," B said, extending the envelope. Before I leave. Christine glanced at the envelope, recognition dawning in her eyes. Ah, the invoice. There's actually a mailing address printed at the bottom. I won't be using it, B interrupted gently. The envelope contains the original invoice, unpaid, along with some additional documentation I thought you should have. Christine's smile tightened. If there's been some confusion about the charges, I'm sure we can clarify. There's no confusion, Christine. B's voice remained level, her gaze steady. I understand perfectly what the invoice represents, what it was intended to accomplish. A slight flush appeared high on Christine's cheekbones, the first genuine color B had seen on her face all weekend. I don't know what you've been told, but these are standard venue charges for accommodations outside the primary contract. Nothing personal. Nothing personal, B repeated thoughtfully. An interesting choice of words for a document that specifically designates me as lower-tier family. That outlines in detail how I was to be separated, served differently, and then charged for the privilege of that diminishment. Christine's composure slipped, just slightly, a tightening around the eyes, a momentary press of lips. You've been speaking with the staff. They were kind enough to share the truth, B acknowledged. Something in short supply this weekend. The staff had no business. They recognized cruelty dressed as etiquette, B said simply, just as I do. Christine set her phone down on the table with deliberate care, squaring her shoulders. When she spoke, her voice had hardened. I don't know what melodrama you're constructing here, Beatrice, but this was a simple matter of event management. Different guests receive different levels of accommodation. That's standard practice in our circles. Your circles, B corrected, gently. Not mine. Precisely my point. Christine's smile returned, thin and precise. You've never understood how these events work. The hierarchies, the protocols. There's a natural order to these celebrations. Natural to whom? B asked. There was nothing natural about a grandmother being seated 7 rows back at her only granddaughter's wedding. Nothing natural about being charged for requesting a cup of tea. Nothing natural about being designated as less than in a family celebration. Christine's expression hardened further. This is exactly the sentimentality I anticipated. This weekend wasn't about your feelings, Beatrice. It was about launching Lauren and Andrew properly into society, about establishing their place in the right circles. Their place, B repeated. Or yours? The question landed with unexpected force. Christine blinked, momentarily at a loss for words. Because that's what this has truly been about, hasn't it? B continued, her voice gentle but penetrating. Your place, your status, your careful curation of who matters and who doesn't, who belongs in the inner circle, and who must be relegated to the periphery. You have no idea. I have every idea, B interrupted, her voice still calm, but now carrying an authority that seemed to fill the room. I've spent decades watching this particular dance, Christine. I've seen how you cultivate certain connections while severing others. How you've encouraged Monica's insecurities to position yourself as the arbiter of what matters. How you've molded Andrew to see relationships as transactions rather than connections. Christine's face had gone very still. You presume a great deal. I observe a great deal, B corrected. It's what people like me do when we're placed at table 19 and expected to be grateful for the invitation. She gestured to the envelope still in Christine's hand. That invoice was never about money. We both know that. It was about establishing hierarchy. About making explicit what you've worked for years to create implicitly, my erasure from my granddaughter's life. That's absurd, Christine scoffed, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. Is it? B asked simply. Then why categorize me as lower-tier family in an internal memo? Why orchestrate a seating chart that physically separated me from my son, my daughter-in-law, my granddaughter? Why create an invoice specifically designed to humiliate? The questions hung in the air between them, unanswerable because they both knew the truth. "Read the note," B said quietly, "and the memo. Then decide whether this is the legacy you want to leave in your son's marriage, whether this is the example you want to set for any grandchildren who may someday follow." Christine made no move to open the envelope, but her knuckles whitened slightly where she gripped it. "I want to thank you, Christine," B continued, her voice softening. "Thank me?" Christine repeated, suspicious. "Yes." B nodded. "For reminding me how much silence costs, for making explicit what has long been implicit. Sometimes we need to see things clearly written out, categorized, itemized, totaled, before we can recognize their true nature." She stepped closer, her voice dropping confidentially. "I've been paying for my place in this family for years, not with money, but with dignity, with acquiescence, with silence in the face of 1,000 small erasures." Christine's expression flickered with something like recognition, a momentary glimpse behind her own carefully constructed facade. "That invoice," B continued, nodding toward the envelope, "was the final accounting. The moment when what had been hidden became visible. When what had been endured became unbearable. And for that clarity, I am genuinely grateful." She stepped back, straightening her shoulders. "I won't be sending a check, Christine, but I have paid my debt to this situation. In years of restraint, in countless moments of choosing peace over truth. That account is now closed." Something shifted in Christine's expression, not quite remorse, but perhaps the first stirrings of doubt. "Beatrice, this has all been blown out of proportion. The invoice was simply a manifestation of values," B finished for her. "Yours, not mine." She glanced at her watch. "My car will be here soon. I should finish gathering my things." As B turned to leave, Christine finally found her voice again. "What will you say to Lauren? To Andrew?" The question revealed Christine's true concern, not B's feelings, but the potential disruption to her carefully constructed narrative. "I'll say what I've always said to Lauren," B replied. "That I love her, that I'm proud of her, that she carries within her everything she needs to build a life of substance rather than merely appearance." She paused at the door. "As for Andrew, his path forward will depend on what he values most, your approval or his wife's trust. I wish him wisdom in that choice." Christine's posture had stiffened, her hostess' smile nowhere in evidence. For perhaps the first time since B had met her, Christine Miller appeared genuinely rattled. Not angry or defensive, but unsettled in some fundamental way, as if the ground beneath her carefully constructed world had shifted. "Goodbye, Christine," B said simply. "Thank you for a most revealing weekend." With that, she departed, closing the door quietly behind her. No dramatic exit, no raised voice, no theatrical flourish. Just the quiet dignity of a woman who had reclaimed her place in her own narrative. As B walked down the corridor, she felt lighter somehow. Not triumphant or vindicated, but unburdened. She had spoken her truth without cruelty, had confronted without attacking, had established boundaries. Without burning bridges, Thomas would have approved. The truest power, he had often said, lies not in dominating others, but in standing firmly in one's own truth. Near the main entrance, B paused, watching the activity around her. Staff members efficiently loaded wedding gifts into waiting vehicles. Guests made their final farewells. The Miller family orchestrated it all with their usual precision, though Christine was notably absent. Across the lobby, B caught sight of Lauren and Andrew in intense conversation. Lauren's posture was resolute, her hand occasionally touching the pocket where she had placed Thomas's compass. Andrew's expression shifted between defensiveness and dawning comprehension as she spoke. Whatever was transpiring between them, it appeared to be a genuine exchange rather than a performance, perhaps their first as husband and wife. Monica stood nearby, watching their conversation with evident anxiety. When she noticed Bea observing from across the room, she quickly looked away, her discomfort palpable even at a distance. Daniel approached his mother, his expression unreadable. "Mom, our car is ready whenever you are. We can drive you home." "Thank you, but I've arranged my own transportation," Bea replied gently. Something like hurt flickered across Daniel's face. "Is that really necessary?" "I think it's best," Bea said. "We all have things to consider after this weekend." He studied her, seeming to truly see her for the first time in years. "Your speech at brunch. It wasn't just wedding advice, was it?" "No," Bea acknowledged. "It wasn't." Daniel glanced toward Lauren and Andrew, then back to his mother. "Lauren's been speaking with us about perceptions, about family dynamics." "Good," Bea said simply. "Mom, I never meant for—" he began, then stopped, struggling to find words. "Things got complicated over the years. Priorities shifted." "Yes," Bea agreed. "They did." She touched his arm gently. "This isn't the time or place for that conversation, Daniel. But I'm open to having it, when you're ready." Before he could respond, a staff member approached to inform Bea that her car had arrived. She thanked them, then turned back to her son. "I love you, Daniel. That has never changed, regardless of how priorities have shifted." She squeezed his arm once, then released it. "When you're ready to talk, truly talk, I'll be home. My door is always open to you." The moment between them was brief but profound. Not a resolution, but perhaps the beginning of one. An acknowledgement that what had been carefully avoided for years had finally been named. As Bea made her final farewells and moved toward the waiting car, she caught Lauren's eye across the lobby. Her granddaughter excused herself from Andrew and hurried over, embracing Bea tightly. "I wish you weren't leaving yet," Lauren said. "Better a clean departure than a lingering one," Bea replied with a smile. "Besides, you have a honeymoon to begin." Lauren lowered her voice. "I talked to Andrew. He claims he didn't know about the invoice specifically, but he admitted he knew his mother had handling systems for what she called challenging family dynamics. And now?" Bea asked. "Now he knows those systems won't apply to my grandmother," Lauren said firmly. "Ever." She touched her pocket, where the compass lay. "I'm still figuring out my bearings in all this, but I know which direction is true." Ursur. Bea cupped her granddaughter's cheek gently. "That's all anyone can ask." As the driver loaded Bea's modest suitcase into the car, she took one final look at Oakvale Estate. Its manicured perfection, its carefully constructed elegance, its illusion of timeless propriety. She had arrived 3 days ago feeling like an outsider, a tolerated presence at her only granddaughter's wedding. She departed now not as a victim or an object of pity, but as a woman who had reclaimed her place in her own family story. Not through drama or confrontation, but through the simple, devastating power of truth spoken with dignity. As the car pulled away, Bea noticed Christine watching from an upstairs window, the envelope still clutched in her hand. Their eyes met briefly, not in anger or triumph, but in mutual recognition. Something had shifted between them, and in the larger family dynamic, what would grow from that shift remained to be seen. But for the first time in years, Bea felt truly present in her own life. Not as a supporting character in someone else's carefully curated narrative, but as the author of her own continuing story. Thomas would have called it justice. Lauren might call it courage. Bea simply thought of it as setting things right, calling them by their proper names, filing them in their correct places, restoring the proper order of things. A librarian to the end. 3 days after returning from Oakvale Estate, Bea settled into the comfortable rhythms of her modest home in the older part of town. the small brick house where she and Thomas had raised Daniel, where they had built their life together, felt especially welcoming after the weekend's tensions. The living room with its well-worn furniture and shelves lined with books. The kitchen where Thomas had attempted countless Saturday morning pancakes, most edible, some questionable. The study where his reading glasses still sat on the desk, untouched since his passing 7 years ago. Morning light filtered through the kitchen windows as Bea prepared her tea, using the blue ceramic pot Thomas had given her on their 30th anniversary. The familiar ritual, warming the pot, measuring loose leaves, waiting precisely 4 minutes before pouring, had always centered her. Today was no exception. She had just settled at the kitchen table with her cup and the morning newspaper when the doorbell rang. Unexpected visitors were rare these days, perhaps a neighbor needing something, or one of those persistent salespeople Thomas had always been too kind to turn away immediately. When she opened the door, she found Lauren standing on the porch, a bakery box in one hand and a tote bag slung over her shoulder. Her granddaughter wore jeans and a simple sweater, a far cry from the elegant bride of the previous weekend. "Surprise," Lauren said, her smile tentative. "I hope it's okay that I dropped by without calling first." Bea recovered quickly from her surprise. "Of course it is. But shouldn't you be somewhere over the Atlantic by now? Rome, wasn't it?" Lauren's expression held a complexity that hadn't been there before the wedding. "That's part of why I'm here. Can I come in?" "Always." Bea stepped back, gesturing her inside. "I've just made tea." Lauren followed her to the kitchen, setting the bakery box on the table. "I brought some of the cake. The top tier was supposed to be saved for our first anniversary, but..." She shrugged. "I thought we might enjoy it now instead." There was something in her voice, a new certainty beneath the hesitation, that caught Bea's attention. She studied her granddaughter as she retrieved plates from the cabinet. "I'd never turn down good cake, but I suspect you didn't drive all the way across town just for a tea party." Lauren smiled, a flash of her old self. "Still reading me like one of your books, Grandma." "Occupational hazard of 43 years as a librarian," Bea replied lightly, setting out forks and napkins. "We become rather good at discerning what people are really looking for, even when they're browsing in the wrong section." As Bea prepared a second cup of tea, Lauren opened the bakery box to reveal a pristine piece of the wedding cake. Layers of vanilla Genoese with raspberry filling, covered in delicate buttercream. Without the elaborate decorations and gold, accents that had adorned the reception version, it looked simpler, more honest somehow. "Beautiful," Bea commented, setting Lauren's tea beside her. "But I believe you were about to tell me why you're having cake with your grandmother instead of exploring Italian ruins with your new husband." Lauren took a deep breath. "We've postponed the honeymoon, just for a few weeks." "I see," Bea said carefully, waiting for more. "After our conversation at Oak Vale, after seeing the invoice and the memo, I couldn't just go on as if nothing had happened." Lauren's voice strengthened as she spoke. "I confronted Andrew more directly once we got home. Really made him understand what his mother had done and how it reflected on both of our families." "That must have been difficult," Bea observed. Lauren nodded. "It was. He kept trying to minimize it, saying his mother just has strong opinions about proper procedures, and that I was overreacting to standard event management." "Familiar phrases," Bea noted dryly. "Too familiar," Lauren agreed. "Like he was reciting from his mother's script, but I kept pressing, showing him how dehumanizing it was to categorize my grandmother, to categorize anyone, as lower-tier family." She cut 2 slices of cake, passing one to Bea. "Eventually, he started to see it. Really see it, especially when I asked how he'd feel if someone had treated his grandfather that way." "And?" Bea prompted gently, taking a small bite of cake. It was indeed excellent, though she noted it tasted different. here in her sunny kitchen than it had in Oakvale's elaborate reception hall. Simpler, more genuine. And we've decided we need to establish some boundaries before starting our life together properly. Lauren's voice held a new maturity. Boundaries with his family, with my parents too, if I'm being honest. She touched her pocket unconsciously, the same pocket where she had placed Thomas's compass during their conversation at Oakvale. Andrew agreed we should postpone the honeymoon while we sort through these issues. He's been more receptive than I expected. Once he started thinking for himself instead of reflexively defending his mother. People often surprise us when given the chance, Bea observed, especially when they're shown truths they can't easily dismiss. Lauren nodded, taking a bite of cake before continuing. Mom called yesterday. She was upset about the postponed honeymoon, worried about appearances and what people might think. Unsurprising, Bea said gently. I told her I was more concerned with building a marriage based on mutual respect than with maintaining appearances. Lauren's gaze was steady. That didn't go over particularly well. I imagine not. Dad hasn't called yet, Lauren added, a hint of sadness creeping into her voice. I think he's caught between Mom's anxiety and his own conscience. Bea reached across the table to cover Lauren's hand with her own. Your father has spent many years perfecting the art of avoidance when faced with difficult choices. Give him time. They ate in companionable silence for a moment, the morning light warming the kitchen, catching the rim of Bea's teacup and the silver edge of the fork in Lauren's hand. I brought something else, Lauren said finally, reaching for her tote bag. She withdrew a small stack of photographs and spread them on the table. These came from my phone. I had them printed yesterday. The images were candid shots from the wedding weekend, moments captured between the professional photographer's orchestrated poses. Lauren laughing with college friends. Andrew looking surprisingly relaxed away from his mother's watchful eye. And several of Bea, seated at table 19, conversing with Judge Ashby, delivering her brunch speech with quiet dignity. I wanted you to have these, Lauren explained. The real moments, not just the curated ones that will go in the official album. Bea examined them thoughtfully. Thank you, dear. They capture the weekend quite comprehensively. Lauren smiled at her. Grandmother's diplomatic phrasing. That's one way to put it. She hesitated, then added, I want you to know something, Grandma. When I invited Judge Ashby to the wedding, it wasn't just as a surprise for you. It was for me, too. How so? Bea asked, genuinely curious. Growing up, I always felt like there was this gap between the stories you told about Grandpa Thomas and the way everyone else talked about him. Lauren traced the edge of her plate absently. Mom and Dad always mentioned his career, his cases, his reputation, but you talked about his values, his principles, the way he treated people regardless of their status. Bea nodded, understanding dawning. And you wanted to meet someone who knew that version of Thomas. Yes, Lauren confirmed. I needed to know if that Thomas was real or if he'd been idealized over time. And did Judge Ashby help you determine that? Bea asked softly. Lauren smiled. He told me Grandpa once turned down a case that would have made the firm a small fortune because, as he put it, I won't use the law to help. The powerful become more powerful at the expense of those who can't fight back. Bea felt her throat tighten. That sounds exactly like Thomas. That's when I knew, Lauren said simply, that the values you've tried to instill in me, the ones I've sometimes ignored or taken for granted, those came from somewhere real. From someone real. She reached into her pocket and withdrew Thomas's compass, placing it on the table between them. I've been carrying this everywhere since you gave it to me, checking it whenever I'm unsure about a decision. And has it helped? Bea asked, her voice gentle. More than you know. Lauren's eyes glistened. Especially when Andrew and I were deciding about the honeymoon, about what matters most right now. Bea studied her granddaughter, the determined set of her jaw that echoed Thomas, the quiet thoughtfulness she had exhibited even as a child. You'll need that direction in the days ahead. Establishing boundaries is never easy, especially with family. I know, Lauren acknowledged. Christine called yesterday, too. She was icily polite. Said she hopes we can all move forward appropriately once Andrew and I recalibrate our priorities. Ah, Bea said, unable to suppress a small smile. The language of someone who isn't accustomed to having her narrative challenged. Exactly, Lauren agreed. But here's the thing, Grandma. I'm not afraid of her disapproval anymore. Or Mom's anxiety. Or Dad's avoidance. For the first time, I feel like I'm making choices based on what matters to me, not on what others expect. The pride Bea felt in that moment was almost overwhelming, not because Lauren was following a path Bea would have chosen, but because she was choosing her own path with clarity and conviction. That's the true inheritance Thomas would have. Wanted for you, Bea said softly. Not money or status or social connections, but the courage to define your own worth, to establish your own boundaries. Lauren nodded, then surprised Bea by laughing suddenly. You know what's ironic? Christine's whole elaborate wedding, all that expense and planning and careful curation, it was supposed to launch Andrew and me into the right circles, to establish us in her world. And instead, Bea prompted. Instead, it revealed exactly why I don't want to live in that world, Lauren said firmly. At least, not on those terms. She reached across the table to squeeze Bea's hand. You showed me that, Grandma. Not by lecturing or criticizing, but by standing in your truth with such quiet dignity that I couldn't help but see the contrast. Bea felt something tight and long-knotted begin to unravel within her chest, a tension she had carried for years without fully acknowledging it. The fear that Lauren, under Monica and Daniel's influence, might become absorbed into the world of appearances and status that Thomas had always resisted. I've always believed you had Thomas's compass within you, Bea said, even before I gave you the physical one. They finished their cake in comfortable silence, the morning sun climbing higher, casting dappled patterns across the simple kitchen table. No fine china, no elaborate centerpieces, no hovering staff, just two women sharing food and truth across generations. What will you do now? Bea asked finally. Besides postponing the honeymoon, Lauren considered. Andrew and I are looking at apartments in the city, something separate from both families, where we can establish our own traditions. A wise beginning, Bea approved. And I've decided to keep my job at the Literacy Foundation, even though Christine thinks it's disappointingly small scale. For someone with my education. Lauren's smile held a hint of mischief. Apparently, Miller wives traditionally chair committees and organize charity galas, not work with immigrant children learning to read. How disappointing for Christine, Bea observed dryly. Isn't it? Lauren agreed with a laugh. And I was hoping you might help me with something else. Of course, dear. I want to learn more about Grandpa Thomas, not just the lawyer everyone talks about, but the man you knew. The values he lived by. Lauren's expression was earnest. I thought maybe we could have dinner together regularly. You could tell me stories, share his letters, help me understand the legacy I'm carrying forward. The request, so simple, yet so profound, moved Bea deeply. This was what had been missing in the carefully orchestrated wedding weekend. Genuine connection, meaningful continuity, values transmitted not through performances of status, but through shared understanding. I would like that very much, Bea said, her voice steady despite the emotion welling beneath it. Lauren gathered their plates, carrying them to the sink with casual familiarity. Is Sunday dinner still your tradition? I remember you and Grandpa always made pot roast on Sundays. It is, B confirmed. Though these days it's often just soup and bread for one. Not anymore, Lauren said firmly, returning to the table. Sundays are ours now. And maybe sometimes Andrew will join us if he continues to prove he can think for himself. She smiled to soften the words. And maybe eventually Mom and Dad, if they can remember what matters. Bea studied her granddaughter, this young woman stepping into her own authority, drawing boundaries with clarity rather than anger, choosing connection over appearance. She saw Thomas in Lauren's determined jaw, in her principled stance. She saw herself in the quiet dignity with which Lauren was reshaping her new life. But mostly, she saw Lauren herself, neither a Miller nor solely an Ellison, but a woman charting her own course with the compass of inherited values and newly claimed convictions. "I'm proud of you," Bea said simply. "Not for standing up to Christine or postponing your honeymoon or any particular decision, but for seeking truth, even when it's uncomfortable, for recognizing worth that can't be categorized or invoiced." Lauren's eyes glistened. "I learned from the best." As they continued talking, making plans for Sunday dinners, sharing stories of Thomas, laughing over memories of Lauren's childhood visits, Bea felt the circle closing. Not ending, but completing one turn before beginning another. The pain of the wedding weekend, the calculated exclusions, the deliberate diminishment, the memo with its cold categorizations, hadn't disappeared. But it had been transformed, alchemized by truth and courage into something unexpectedly valuable: clarity, connection, continuation. From her place at the simple kitchen table, with her granddaughter laughing across from her and Thomas's compass, gleaming between them, Beatrice Ellison understood that this was the true victory. Not a dramatic confrontation or public vindication, but this quiet reclamation of family on their own terms. No assigned seating, no tiered service, no calculated hierarchy, just love, chosen and declared without reservation or invoice. A seat at the table, freely given and gratefully occupied. This was worth more than any reception could measure, any invoice could itemize, any status could confer. This was legacy, not as performance, but as lived reality, passing not from hand to hand like silver or china, but from heart to heart like courage and conviction. Thomas, Bea thought, would have called it justice. The best kind, quiet, lasting, and grown from love rather than resentment. A justice that didn't need to announce itself with drama or demand acknowledgement. A justice that simply was, as enduring, as dignity, as valuable as truth, as warm as a seat at the family table, claimed and kept, generation after generation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.